You already know this story. Or you think you do. An old woman buys a coffee at McDonald's, spills it on herself, and sues for millions. For 30 years, it's been the go-to joke for a legal system gone mad, proof that anyone can sue anyone for anything and get rich. There's just one problem. Almost every part of that story is wrong. And the real version is so much darker, and so much more important to you, that by the end of this video you'll never repeat the joke again. Because this wasn't a greedy woman cashing in on a little spill. This was a corporation that knew it was injuring people, a 79-year-old with horrifying injuries, and a verdict that everyone, on purpose, got backwards. The year is 1992. The woman is Stella Liebeck, 79 years old, in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She's a passenger in her grandson's car. They pull over so she can add cream and sugar to her coffee. The car is parked, not moving. She steadies the cup between her knees and pulls off the lid. And the coffee goes into her lap. Now, here's the picture most people have in their heads: a minor burn, a little redness, a woman looking for a payday. Hold on to that image. Because what the coffee actually did to her is the first thing the myth erased. This was not a red mark. This was not, ouch. Stella Liebeck suffered third-degree burns, the most severe kind, the kind that destroys skin all the way through, across her lap, her groin, and her thighs. Her cotton sweatpants soaked the scalding liquid and held it against her skin. She spent 8 days in the hospital. She needed skin grafts. She lost a significant amount of weight and was, for a time, genuinely debilitated by the injury. This is one of the worst things a hot liquid can do to a human body. And it happened in seconds, from a cup of coffee, in a parked car. So the question stops being, why did she sue, and becomes something much more uncomfortable: how is fast food coffee even capable of doing that? To be clear about how serious this is, third-degree burns mean the skin is destroyed all the way through, often past the point where the body can heal itself. That's why she needed grafts, surgeons taking healthy skin from one part of her body to rebuild another. This is the category of injury you associate with house fires and industrial accidents. Not with sitting in a parked car, holding breakfast. The answer is a single number. Temperature. McDonald's, by its own corporate policy at the time, served its coffee at roughly 180 to 190 degrees Fahrenheit. Coffee you'd make at home sits closer to 140. That gap sounds small. It isn't. At 190 degrees, liquid can cause third-degree burns in as little as 2 to 7 seconds. At home temperatures, you'd have many seconds to react before that kind of damage was even possible. So this wasn't ordinary hot coffee that anyone might spill. This was coffee kept dangerously, deliberately hotter than almost anywhere else, hot enough that a single accident could send someone to the operating table. And that was a choice. Here's the part that turned a jury's stomach, and it's the part the joke completely buries. McDonald's wasn't surprised by Stella Liebeck. In the years before her case, the company had received more than 700 reports of people being burned by its coffee. 700. Some of them serious. Some of them already settled for money. Read that again. The company had documented, for a decade, that its coffee was injuring its own customers. And it kept the temperature exactly where it was. That single fact is the difference between an accident and negligence. This wasn't a freak event nobody could have predicted. It was a known danger, known, counted, and ignored, until it badly hurt a 79-year-old woman. And at trial, McDonald's didn't really deny knowing. Its own people acknowledged the coffee was hot enough to cause serious burns, and argued, in effect, that this was on purpose, that they kept it that hot for taste, and to keep it warm for customers driving to work. In other words, the position was that a certain number of badly burned people was simply an acceptable cost of doing business. To the jury, that wasn't a defense. That was the entire problem, said out loud in a courtroom. And now the detail that destroys the greedy myth for good. Stella Liebeck did not march into court demanding millions. After the burns, after the hospital, after the skin grafts, she asked McDonald's for one thing: to cover her medical bills. Roughly $20,000. McDonald's offered her $800. That's it. That's why this went to a courtroom. Not greed, a refusal. A woman with third-degree burns asked a corporation to pay her hospital costs, and the corporation essentially said no. Everything that followed flowed from that. So it went to a jury. And the jury heard all of it: the burns, the 700 prior complaints, the temperature, the $800 offer. They awarded her around $200,000 in compensatory damages, money for the actual harm, though they reduced it because they decided she was partly at fault for the spill herself. Then they did something that made headlines: they added $2.7 million in punitive damages. And this is the piece almost everyone misunderstands. Punitive damages are not a prize. They're not meant to compensate the victim. They exist to punish a company for reckless behavior, and to make it stop. The jury reportedly arrived at that number by looking at what McDonald's earned from coffee in just a day or two of sales. It was a message: this is what it costs to keep ignoring people you're burning. And here's the ending the joke never mentions. The judge later slashed that punitive amount dramatically, and the two sides ultimately settled for a confidential figure that was far less. Stella Liebeck did not walk away with millions. She never did. But the verdict did its real job in a different way. In the aftermath, McDonald's, and a lot of other chains watching closely, quietly lowered the temperature of the coffee they served. The lawsuit everyone calls frivolous almost certainly spared hundreds of future customers from being burned. That is exactly what punitive damages are designed to do: not to enrich one person, but to change the behavior of a company big enough to ignore everyone else. So if the real story is a badly injured woman versus a company that knew better, how did it become the world's favorite example of a frivolous lawsuit? It didn't happen by accident. In the years after, this case was held up, again and again, by corporations and the lobbyists working for them, as Exhibit A in a campaign for what's called tort reform, limiting how much ordinary people can win when they sue big companies. To sell that idea, they needed a villain. So the story got flattened. The third-degree burns vanished. The 700 complaints vanished. The $800 offer vanished. What was left was a cartoon, a greedy old lady and a harmless cup of coffee. That cartoon was useful, because a public that laughs at injury victims is a public that won't mind when their rights get quietly capped. You were handed the version that served the powerful. Most people still repeat it for free. It became a punchline on late-night shows, in newspaper columns, in everyday conversation, repeated by millions of people who had never read a single fact of the case. And that's the quiet genius of it: you don't need to censor an inconvenient truth if you can just make the lie funnier. Once she was reduced to the coffee lady, the real victim disappeared, and so did the hard questions about what a giant company is allowed to do to the people who trust it. So here's why this 30-year-old coffee case still matters to you. Punitive damages, the thing this case is mocked for, are one of the only real weapons an ordinary person has against a company that decides hurting people is cheaper than fixing the problem. When you hear frivolous lawsuit, it's worth asking who benefits from you believing that. Sometimes it's true. And sometimes it's the most powerful party in the room telling you not to look too closely. Just remember, the law varies enormously depending on where you live, and none of this is legal advice. It's the story of one case and what it really decided. So here's my question for you: now that you know the real version, Who do you think the system was actually protecting? Tell me below. And if this flipped something in your head, the lawsuit so absurd it sounds fake, but actually changed the law, is on screen now.